I see that. Great. Hello, everyone, and welcome to RBCM at Home. My name is Kim Goff, and I'm a learning program developer at the Royal BC Museum. I'm coming to you from my home on the territories of the Lekwungen-speaking people in Esquimalt, British Columbia. In this series, we're talking with staff of the museum who've been asked to work from home about their work and research. Today, we have Objects Conservator Megan Doxsey-Whitfield. Megan recently joined the museum and is a graduate of the Queen's University Master of Art Conservation, and she's previously completed conservation contracts with the Field Museum of Chicago and the Archaeology Lab of the Canadian Conservation Institute and at the National Museum of the American Indian. Welcome, Megan.
Thank you. It's very exciting to be here talking about silver pieces.
Great. Yeah, we're going to be talking about the care of silver at home, and I see you have some interesting pieces in front of you there.
Yes. So my partner is an avid collector of silver from thrift stores and secondhand stores and in little antique shops. And so while we've been at home throughout this pandemic, it's been a good time to set aside a little time to give some attention and care to our own collection. So yeah, looking forward to sharing some of that information with everyone.
Excellent. So yeah, we want to learn how to take care of our own silver like a conservator would. So what are some of the first things you consider?
Okay, so there's quite a lot to get through. So today we're going to try to cover basically what is tarnish and why does it show up? Why does it occur? A few of the different manufacturing processes of different kind of silver objects, because that's something we sort of think about when we think about how to clean and care for our silver. And then also a little bit about some different polishes, what you might choose, how you might choose a different polish, and then also some different storage techniques that might help your silver if you're not having it on display all the time. So we'll try to work through all of that. So should I just dive right in?
Dive right in, yeah.
Okay, let me think about this screen sharing. All right. So what is silver tarnish? So tarnish is the formation of a layer of silver sulfide on the exposed silver surface. So it's a chemical reaction between sulfur-containing compounds in the air around us and the silver itself. So silver sulfide is black in color, but we often see tarnish as a range of colors from grays through yellows to blues and purples. So these are called interference colors, and we see these different colors based on how thick the tarnish is. So how the light reflects off the object, and as the tarnish layer gets thicker, it tends to appear more black and uniform in color. So that's kind of the main thing about tarnish. Another sort of condition issue or corrosion product is silver chloride. So this can happen from the fingerprints that we leave on silver. So the oils and salts on our hands, even if you don't see the fingerprint right away when you touch your object, it can show up later and be very distinctive as a fingerprint. So that's often why you hear people talk about wearing gloves when you're handling your silver. So let me get back to my live view. All right, so when a silver object tarnishes, it's actually that very top layer of silver that's reacting and changing into the tarnish. So when we polish and remove that, you're taking off that very top surface. So you're gradually taking away the silver, and you can get down right to the base metal. So that's why it's important to understand how your object is made, because if it's just a plated piece of silver, you can wear right through that silver eventually.
So a little bit of tarnish isn't always a terrible thing. Maybe I'm protecting it by leaving it a little bit black.
Yeah, so that's something we'll talk about is how do you choose how frequently you want to polish your object? And that is based a lot on how, especially for your own collection at home, how you personally want it to look. So that might impact how you decide and when you decide to clean it. So one way that we can see this sort of tarnishing reaction is with a little experiment. So I have here a freshly polished butter knife that I polished this morning, and I have a container with a hard-boiled egg. And hard-boiled eggs give off a little bit of hydrogen sulfide gas. And so even just for the half hour that we have for this chat, it should, in theory, start to cause that tarnishing process. And we'll see it happen on this knife at the end of the sort of session. So once again, if you're interested in doing that at home, just remember it is sort of speeding up the process of tarnish. So you might want to think about that before you decide to try that on your own pieces of silver. Okay, but let's talk a little bit about some of the manufacturing processes. So silver is a very malleable, soft metal, and you rarely get it in its pure form just as silver. It's often alloyed with copper to make it harder. So even sterling silver isn't pure silver. It's 92.5% silver and 7.5% copper. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have something called nickel silver, which contains no silver at all. And so that's made up of nickel, copper, and zinc, and just gives off a silvery appearance. So it's imitation silver, so to speak.
Does it still tarnish, Megan?
It wouldn't tarnish in the same way. That's a specific silver reaction. So that can really sort of, knowing what your object is made of is fairly important in thinking about how you treat it. So you can have objects made from solid sterling silver, like this spoon here, and you can have plated pieces of silver like this butter knife. And how do we know the difference? So one of the ways you can figure out what's what is by using the hallmarks and looking at those. So on the bottoms of, or on somewhere on real silver objects or plated silver objects, there's usually a stamp that tells you all sorts of valuable information. So this has been in practice for centuries, and you can know sort of the company that made the piece, sometimes the year, sometimes the region the piece of silver was made in. So there's a lot of valuable information you can glean from that. So this cup, for example, which is bright and silver, it doesn't have a hallmark at all. And you can see it's much shinier than the rest of the silver I have on the table. So it is not made from silver at all. And so we don't really have to worry about that one. So let me just go back into my shared screen here. Oh yeah, and I think I missed a whole section talking about different manufacturing processes. So let's go back to that for a quick minute. So in the different sort of ways that you can get plated silver, it's historically been done through a lot of different mechanisms. So there's silver foil that can be hammered onto a base metal. There's Sheffield silver, which is layers of silver sheet and copper sort of sandwiched together, heated and rolled out. And then a very common one from the 1840s is electroplating. So that's where you put your base metal, so like a copper spoon, into a silver containing solution with the metal salts in the solution, and you can run a current through it. And this process will cause a reaction to happen on the surface of the cathode, the spoon, and convert that silver in the solution to solid metal. And this was really a big development because it applies the silver very evenly and very consistently over the whole surface. So it's a very common thing to see electroplated or plated as part of your marks.
My science chemistry is coming back to me a little bit looking
right?
at that. Yeah, flashback.
Yeah, forgive my crude drawing there.
No, it's awesome.
It was fun to do. So, for example, in going down the Google rabbit hole of hallmarks, so for this odd object, which it turns out is an egg coddler, you have a little heating device at the bottom, you put your eggs and some water in there, you close the lid, and you steam your eggs. This object we think is from between 1874 and 1886, which I figured out because you see the JR and S, that's the company, John Round and Son, and then that little symbol at the end, the all the round, that symbol, they only use that between those two dates. So that's how I sort of learned that. And then in the oval, you see EP, and that stands for electroplated. So that gave me a lot of information about that one. These tongs with the sort of chicken fingers at the end, the only information on it is this on the hinge where it says silver plated. So no information about the manufacturer. It's a bit more of a mystery, but fun nevertheless to try to figure some of it out. So there's a lot of good resources like published books that can tell you all sorts of information about these different kinds of hallmarks, but truly a good Google rabbit hole works pretty well as well. So where did I get to? So with silver plating, what we know, let's see, is that the layer of silver is really quite thin. So we know that tarnish is the top layer of the silver and it's reacted to change color. And when we remove that tarnish, we're removing that silver. So some of the other things that you might think about is how is your object actually put together? So for the egg coddler, it's got these little lion's feet on balls. If those are hollow or depending on how they've been attached, it could be dangerous to get them wet and have water enter into any sort of crevices. Likewise, if your object is composite, so if it has a different material for the handle, like this antler handled knife, the sort of ferrule there right in the middle, that's the silver piece. The blade isn't silver and the handle isn't silver, but you want to be careful around soft materials like bone or antler if you're using abrasive polishes. And then the top image on the gray is actually the most concerning. So this is a meat fork that separated from the handle, and all of that white powder inside, that's lead corrosion, and lead corrosion is very hazardous. So if you have, and that's often because it was soldered together. So it started as two pieces and was put together, and somehow over time, so if water got in, it just started this process, broke down and came apart. So if you have anything like that in your collection, you want to be really careful about how you handle it. It's hazardous to touch, hazardous to inhale, and in fact, anything you use to clean it up should be considered hazardous waste and disposed of according to the regulations of the region you live in. So that's definitely something to watch out for, but not going to come up all the time, I don't think. So getting ahead of myself here. All right, so back to the question of why are we polishing? So when you're thinking about your objects at home, really the major consideration you have to think about is how do you want your object to look? It's really very personal. So in the museum, if we are working on silver pieces, we would factor in a few more considerations, such as what was the object used for historically? There are some silver pieces that aren't meant to be shiny. They were meant to look sort of that dull gray. So you wouldn't want to polish that one. And then also considering how often has it been polished in its past, because we wouldn't want to polish it to put it on display and have it suddenly appear over polished where you've worn down to that base metal, which can happen. So this little mini sieve, the inside is quite yellow and coppery colored, and that's likely because either the food that's been in it or just the way it's been cleaned over time has started to wear away that silver finish. So before we get talking too much about different sort of commercial products or things that you can use, something that's really important to think about is the fact that every object is different and unique and might have a different history and a different sort of importance to you. So if you are polishing up your flatware before a big family dinner, this might be very appropriate and sort of something you might think about doing routinely every year. But if you have a really special piece, like an heirloom or something like that, that might have some more unique features, it could be really recommended to talk to a conservator before you do any sort of cleaning, because part of our training is to be able to look at and assess those unique characteristics that might call for special consideration. So it might be helpful to have someone look specifically at your object before you start on any sort of cleaning process.
Megan, how do people find a conservator if they do have that special something and they think, oh, maybe I should should ask?
Yeah, so the Canadian Association of Conservation and the Canadian Association of Professional Conservation, there's a website where you can go and look for different conservators in your area. So that's a way you can reach out and try to find someone who might have knowledge in that particular area to help you out. So I can provide you, I don't think I provided you with that link, but I can get that to you.
Sure, we can look it up behind the scenes too.
Perfect, yeah. Okay, so polishes are generally made up of an abrasive in a sort of solvent or some sort of carrier to allow it to flow easily over the silver surface. And so the abrasive, it functions by literally cutting through the tarnish and scratching it and removing it from the surface. So that means it doesn't just stop when it hits the end of the tarnish, it would keep going through that silver. So that means you want to give some consideration to what kind of abrasive product you're using. So generally, the goal is to have all of that abrasion just not show up as distinct scratches, but just look like a very fine, even layer that gives you that nice, shiny finish. So polishing cloths, so this example here, polishing cloths generally have a very mild abrasive embedded into it. They can sometimes have an anti-tarnishing compound as well that will help prevent future tarnishing. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But so these are generally considered fairly gentle and might be suitable for a very mild layer of tarnish. So if it's just started and you want it to look nice and shiny again, this might be an appropriate method to just bring that back fairly quickly. And then other commercial products that might have sort of that abrasive embedded into a foam or some sort of wadding, those can get increasingly aggressive. So waddings, let's open this one up here. They tend to be a cotton batting type material that has an abrasive agent embedded into it and often a mineral spirit carrier. So the thing to think about with those is you want to make sure any commercial product you choose is specifically formulated for silver. So there's different kinds of abrasives that can be used in different products. So calcium carbonate is just on the Mohs scale of hardness, it's just slightly harder than silver and silver fluoride, or in silver sulfide, the tarnish layer. Whereas aluminum oxide, which can come as a very, very fine abrasive, it is significantly harder. So it would have a more efficient cutting action to remove that silver, which might sound great, but it's been shown that a more gentle cleaning that takes a bit longer is a bit safer and more efficient. So that's something that you might want to think about as well. And then the other thing about some of these is, depending on how long they've been sitting on your shelf, if you've had something around for quite some time that you know you like, it's a good product, it works for you, that solvent carrier can evaporate and the remaining particles that are in the solution can get more aggregated. And so instead of having this fine, even particulate, you get these clumps, and that can lead to deeper, bigger scratches. So that's something to sort of be aware about.
So if it looks clumpy and it's not really wet looking anymore, chances are it's expired.
Yeah, I mean, it's not really expired. It's just sort of, it would be riskier to use it.
Okay.
I would think, yeah. You might want to think twice. So a good way to actually test your polish, if you're not too sure, is actually to get yourself a piece of plexiglass, because plexiglass has about the same hardness as silver. So if you do a little practice polish on a corner of plexi, you'll see about the same scratch pattern as what you would get on your silver object. So that can also be a sort of fun way to try out, you know, how much elbow grease are you using and see the different reactions of you know, polishing directly in a linear way, are you going to get these linear scratches that you can see? Or if you do this very gentle sort of circular motion that takes forever, is that going to give you a better result? So that's one way you can test it out beforehand. So all of that said, with those commercial products, conservators often shy away from using commercial products because they don't always tell you exactly what's in them. And so that also means these proprietary materials could change the formula so even if we do all this testing and we're like, okay, that seems like a good one, they can change the formula on us, and then you don't know what you're getting anymore. And then something else that I just realized I forgot to mention is when you're making sure your product is specifically formulated for silver, that's important because, so this one here says it's good for all metals: silver, gold, brass, glass, steel, aluminum. So a lot of those metals are quite a bit harder than silver. So if they are effective on those harder metals, it's just that much more aggressive on your silver. But there's a link we have that talks about making your own silver polish at home. So this is something that I've used for museum objects. It's from the Canadian Conservation Institute. And so I'm going to play a little video of me cleaning with it, and I'll talk a little bit more about it. And yeah, let me get there. Oh, and looks like in the process I've missed all sorts of pictures. So this is an image of a spoon handle that has this really decorative element. And so this is a case where the tarnish actually helps show the details and the features. So that's something to think about, is what sort of engravings or fine lines are on your object that you might want to enhance or preserve. And so the tarnish is actually very useful to have that effect. And on this spoon in particular, you can also see one of the risks of cleaning, where it's been polished so much in this vertical way on the spoon, we're kind of missing the bottom A of Canada. And that's because it's just been worn down. So that's where you want to be really careful about those raised surfaces. But let's see if I can get this video to go. Maybe I'll just leave it like this because it seems to be going. So to make our own silver polish, so you reliably know the ingredients, you can use precipitated calcium carbonate, distilled water, and a tiny amount of a gentle detergent. And all of those instructions are in that link. So it's important to note that you can't substitute whiting or general brown chalk for the precipitated product, because those are a much larger particle size material, so it would be scratchier. So if you've examined your object and you've decided it's safe to clean with a polish, you might start by rinsing it a little bit in a bit of that gentle detergent solution. This just helps you take off any dust or grease that's accumulated that you don't want to grind into the silver. You can apply the polish, which is usually about the consistency of a heavy cream, with a soft cotton cloth or a cotton swab. Conservators often like to roll their own swabs rather than using Q-tips or other commercial products, just because those are really tightly bound and can be scratchier. This is also a convenient way, since we tend to go through a lot of them. You can just take off that cotton tip, make a new one, and keep going without creating so much waste. So, and then you just want to polish using a gentle pressure in a circular pattern, really avoiding those linear, deep elbow grease sort of. Don't plan to polish like all your silver in one go, because you tend to get fatigued and then you get more aggressive as you just want it to go faster. So that's something to think about too. But that's because I'm not sure where we're at and if we're going to run out of time.
Well, you're doing fine.
Oh, good. Oh, perfect. Glad to hear it. You always start to talk a little bit faster as you get going. So yeah. Okay, we'll just watch that little thing about some more polishing. But something to think about for after you've polished is how to store your silver. So if it's the case where you are putting it on display and you're not really going to touch it very often, and you really wanted to make sure you're not leaving fingerprints, you've polished it with your gloves, that's really great. If it's something where you're polishing it because dinner is tomorrow and everyone's going to be eating with it, you maybe don't need to be as fussy about putting on those gloves or making sure you have some. Something else you might want to think about though is making sure you don't put them in the dishwasher. So dishwashers are quite aggressive on silver, both because of that physical jostling and all the food bits flying around and everything. It's just really like a macro of that really abrasive characteristic. So that can lead to a lot of damage. So something to think about.
I noticed in the video, Megan, which is just about over here, after you polish it, so thinking about polishing your cutlery for that big dinner, I mentioned rinsing it off is pretty important.
Yeah, so that's also another reason it's nice to not always use some of these proprietary things where you don't know exactly what solvent or like what's in them, but just rinsing it more in fresh distilled water, even a couple of rounds, it really does help. And that's something you can see too in recessed areas is often polish can leave residues, and you, even after you rinse it once, you might not see it, and then it reappears almost by magic as this like sort of chalky looking material of whatever kind of polish you use. And it's just like really stuck in there. So especially if you have an object with lots of tiny little nooks and crannies, it can really show up, and you want to be careful about that. Sometimes some sharpened bamboo skewers. So if you're looking to like get that out, you want to make sure you're not using anything harder than the silver. So you don't want to use like a pin or a needle, because that's really hard compared to the metal surface. So something softer with a fine point is better, like those plastic floss picks and things like that might be more appropriate. Mm-hmm. But just so briefly on storage, so if you aren't putting your object on display and you want to polish it and then wrap it up and hope it keeps that shine for as long as possible, there are a few different methods that could be used. You'll probably commonly remember wrapping your silver in saran wrap. That's really effective at keeping out the oxygen, but unfortunately saran wrap can start to degrade over time. It starts to break down and leach out plasticizers. So this won't necessarily cause tarnish, but it could create a streaky residue that will live on your object. I did also talk a little bit about some of the anti-tarnishing compounds that are in some polishes. Those really, they prevent tarnish, but if you haven't polished evenly or applied it very evenly, what can happen is that as that piece tarnishes over time, you'll get some areas that are tarnishing more quickly than others, and it could have a streaky appearance that's maybe less appealing than an evenly patinaed, tarnished object. But so one way you can store things that's better than saran wrap is just in a polyethylene bag. So, so it's just a Ziploc bag. And then inside, there's a product called Pacific Silver Cloth, and this is an anti-tarnish cotton fabric that has silver particles embedded in it. So it's kind of sacrificial. So the air is trying to get to your silver, but first it has to go through this cloth that has silver in it. So it reacts there first, and then whatever gets through to your object doesn't have as much of those harmful components. So that's, wrapping that up is a really nice way to reduce that, that rate of corrosion or tarnish.
And where can people get silver cloth? Is that something that's easily accessible?
I can't remember exactly where you get it from, but you can find it online, and I think you can order it by the meter. So you can sew it, you can cut it, and you can sew it into like specific shapes for your particular collection. One thing to think about is that if you wash it, that sort of ruins or hastens the effect, because you don't really want to do that. So you also don't want it to get super dusty. So that's why I recommend putting it in a polyethylene bag after, just to help reduce the oxygen flow and also preserve it. And so likewise, if you have extra cloth, if you do go that route, you want to be careful to store any extras in a sealed plastic bag as well, because if you leave it just open to the air, it's going to be reacting and be less effective. Yeah. But let's just check in on our butter knife that we got to tarnishing. So yeah, already, so I don't know how well we can see it.
Oh yes, it's turning definitely starting to change.
So compared to this one that's still polished, and actually I put one in just because I wasn't sure how visual it would be. I put one in this morning as well at 9 o'clock this morning. So here's the one that's just been half an hour, and here's one from this morning at 9 o'clock. So it's significantly tarnished. So just watch out for all those food gases and things in your kitchen, and yeah.
Great.
But that's kind of it for me, but I'm happy to take some questions if there are any.
Great. So our folks on Zoom, you can just type directly, and if there's any on Facebook, Wes will pass those over. Megan, I'm starting to think maybe a little bit of tarnish is okay. Is there ever a time when it's not okay?
To be honest, that is something I haven't thought about too much, and I'm sure there's conservators out there who'll be like, yep, this is the instant. I think it can, if it builds up really, really heavily, it can sort of be challenging to get off without more aggressive mechanical action. But truthfully, I think because every time you polish, that silver surface becomes more reactive and it just starts all over again. I would be more inclined to let it have this natural patina that just sort of develops evenly, rather than trying to take it down too often.
Yeah. So people, if they can't live with that little bit of tarnish or patina, they should check how their silver was made, looking for those hallmarks and finding out if it's plated, and then choosing a polish that's going to be the less abrasive in those situations.
Yeah, choosing one that's really appropriate, and then applying it with care and giving yourself enough time, making sure you get all of those polish residues off. You don't want to leave those in place. And then really, but before you go there, think about, what am I polishing it for? Because during part of this, we started just polishing some because we had time on our hands, but we hadn't really thought through yet, oh wait, we should either get some silver polish, Pacific silver cloth, or how are we going to store these after? So we have some freshly polished silver, but we hadn't necessarily considered how we were going to store it yet. So maybe doing those in tandem as well is a good practice to really make sure you're getting the longest life out of your hard work and effort.
Great. Thank you, Megan. There's so many good tips there and lots of things to consider. As you say, just because you have time on your hands, maybe it's not the best use of the time that you've got. So thank you for sharing all those tips and helpful suggestions. It's been really great. I want to thank everybody for joining us today, Megan especially. Thank you so much. As we were mentioning at the very beginning, the Royal BC Museum is getting ready to reopen on Friday, June the 19th. And as a staff member, I'm thankful for the teams that have been working to ensure the safest conditions for staff, volunteers, partners, and visitors to return. And you can find out more on our website and by watching this program at home on Thursday at 12 p.m. through Facebook and Zoom. And we're going to take you to the museum and give you an orientation and a walkthrough so you know what to expect. We will be continuing at home kids, and at outside for the foreseeable future. And links for all of those programs are posted on the Royal BC Museum's website. So thank you for including us in your screen time, and keep taking care of yourselves and one another. Thank you.
Thank you.
So